Welcome to the Your Most Interesting Story podcast. My name's Rob, and each episode I intend to serve you up a big old piece of real-life pie as we hear about and dig into the most interesting thing that's happened to someone in their life. These are first-hand, true stories told by everyday people. All right, let's hear Jeff's most interesting story, shall we? He told Jake and me all about the time he spent in post-communist Russia in the early 1990s. The mafia, meat wagons, and 80-proof windshield wiper fluid. Ready? Let's go.
So I'm Jeff. I was lucky enough to spend some time in Russia during the early 90s, a couple of years after the fall of communism. I was working part-time with my father. His company, which was called Hudson Partners, was rehabbing houses in Old Town in Chicago. Somehow, the company ended up on this list of the top 3 remodelers in Chicago. They were just doing a couple of houses. Somehow they ended up on this list. This Russian delegation was coming to town and saw this list. They contacted my father.
This is essentially where Jeff's story begins. They agreed to host the Russian delegation, and when they arrived, Jeff's dad and his business partner took them around to not only tour Hudson Partners' business activities, but they also went to Las Vegas. Viva America!
They did their whole tour thing, and they were having a great time. These guys were connecting really well, and near the end of the trip, the main guy, he said, "I'm looking for a machine to manufacture rubber stamps." The Soviets, they love stamps. All the documents they have, nobody will take you seriously unless you have tons of stamps on there. In a matter of a month or something like that, they bought 3 of these machines.
What do you make of that?
I think this was probably a test.
If it was a test, they apparently passed, as this was the beginning of a multi-year business arrangement where Hudson Partners was now bidding on and winning construction projects in Russia, which required them to spend a lot of time in Moscow. That meant that Jeff and his dad were now immersed in a country and culture that were completely foreign to them.
I arrived in Moscow for the first time. I go into the airport and I'm going to go through immigration, and I go up to the guy and I give him my passport. He's looking at my visa and he looks at me and he goes, "Problem."
That's not what you want to hear.
Yeah. I was like, "Problem? Well, where's the problem?" It's the first time I've gone through immigration in Russia. What are they going to do? If there's a problem, does this mean he's going to take me somewhere and find a problem? I was like scared to death. Honestly, I was scared. He looks at me again. He goes, "Problem." And then I realized, oh, okay. I think I know what he means. So I reach into my pocket and I pull out a 20 and I give him the 20 and no more problem. Most of everything that you need for living over there wasn't there either. So if you needed anything, you better have brought it with you because you didn't have any choice. It was like camping in a way. The food was starting to come around a little bit, but it just wasn't there yet.
One of the first projects that they worked on was in the Novosti building in downtown Moscow. Jeff said it had been built to house the foreign press during the 1980 Olympics.
Working in this office building, and you get the smell out of the cafeteria. It smells great. You go down there, and oh my God, the food was, it was the worst food I've ever had in my life, without question. You go through the line, and you get up to the cashier. All of the people cashing people out have an abacus, and they're calculating the total of the food, and then they go and ring it up into the cash register after they get the total.
Why do you think that was?
I think that they didn't trust the modern machine.
One time, when Jeff's wife was in town, one of his local business partners suggested they all go to what he considered to be a nice restaurant.
There's this giant TV tower in the north side of Moscow. Huge thing. You can see it for miles and miles. And on top, there was a restaurant that revolved. At this point, if anybody brought me anything with dill in it, I could not eat it because they put dill in everything.
Dill is disgusting.
Even today, I can't eat dill. I cannot, just from being there. Because it was just like covered up the nasty flavor of whatever you were eating. It was just, oh. So we're eating in this restaurant, and we can't read the menu. It's all in Russian. He's ordering for us. And so we're eating this stuff. And I'm like, what's inside here? And he goes, it's meat. And I said, yeah, I know it's meat, but what kind of meat is it? He goes, I don't know. It's meat. It was like, it didn't matter. It's not a vegetable. It's not a turnip. It's meat. And so we never knew what we were eating, but it was meat. It was in the middle of winter. His truck came by the Novosti building and turned down this alley, and the back flap came down, and people just started crowding up to it. And there was just these frozen cows in the back, skinned cows.
Oh.
And they had a hatchet, and they were just cutting off pieces of the cow and selling it to these people.
In America, you've got ice cream trucks and the kids gather around. In Moscow, the adults have the meat wagon.
The meat wagon. There's this outdoor flea market called Izmailova. Anybody who was selling anything would be selling their stuff there. It was mostly trinkets, maybe pots and pans that people made, or dishware, or basically anything. Surplus gear from the Soviet army, and they would sell Soviet watches with a hammer and sickle on them. They're more like souvenirs, right? And you can get souvenir medals and souvenir fur hats, the fur Russian hats and that kind of stuff. But there was also the underground, where you go up to one of these guys and say, okay, so, where's the good stuff?
In the Orthodox Christian faith practiced in Russia prior to the communist era, icons were sacred images or paintings depicting religious scenes. Created by skilled artists trained in the sacred art of iconography, they were typically displayed prominently within churches and often had profound religious significance.
And so if you wanted something more real, everything was for sale. There were all of these old churches from pre-Soviet times. Right after the fall of communism, people went in and chipped out all of these old icons that were made of gold, and anything that was even attached, was taken and sold somewhere.
Did they have any trucks that would drive around with an old church in the back and hack off pieces for people?
Yeah. Here's an icon for you. Here's a pulpit.
Despite plenty of surprises, Jeff's experiences in Russia also align with a few expected stereotypes.
Another aspect of my story, I got sober in 1991. And of course, there's a ton of vodka. My first time there, I was a couple of years in. Everybody's like, no, you have to drink the vodka. I'm like, no, I don't have to drink the vodka. Even the children in Russia drink champagne. Yeah, no, I'm not going to drink the vodka. It's like January. It was cold. I mean, cold. Chicago's cold. It doesn't even compare. We were driving around Moscow. The window was fogging up really bad. The windshield wipers weren't getting it clear. This guy pulls over to the side of the road. He runs over to this kiosk. And there were all these kiosks all over Moscow that sold cigarettes and alcohol and whatever else you wanted. He ran up there, bought a bottle of cheap vodka, came out and just poured it on the windshield and just wiped it off.
So their windshield wiper fluid is just straight up vodka.
Very much on brand.
The subways. Oh my God. Just the best subway system in the world. 100%. Man, they knew how to move people around that city. It was amazing. It was cheap as hell, too. You go and you buy this little plastic token for 8 cents. I swear to God, it was 8 cents. You could go anywhere in the city on this. And the stations were museums. Everyone had a theme. Maybe this theme was Ukraine and the wheat of Ukraine. And the whole thing would be decorated. And it was just beautiful. This was all built for propaganda for the Russian people to feel proud about giving everything to the state.
But not all of the art that was created in the communist era remained intact. Vladimir Lenin was a central figure in the establishment of the Soviet Union in the early 1900s, and statues of him have been erected throughout the country, serving as symbols of the communist ideology.
During that time, they were knocking down the Lenin statues. And so you could drive around and you'll see this Lenin statue just toppled over. And there was this museum next to Gorky Park where they were just taking all these Lenin statues and just throwing them out in the back. There was just a big pile of Lenin statues.
In addition to these interesting and unfamiliar cultural experiences, there was a significantly seedier side to Jeff's time in Russia that went well beyond the petty extortion he'd experienced with the immigrations agent when he'd first arrived at the Moscow airport.
A construction permit in Moscow is pretty cheap. I think it's probably about the equivalent of $50. But the bribe to get it was 16 grand. Okay. So my dad went down to the office to get the permit. He took one of the other guys with him, one of the Russian guys, and he had 16 grand in a paper bag. It was like $100 bills in a paper bag. And they go into the office, they're getting the paperwork ready. And my dad's like, well, where do we put this? And the guy just opens the drawer. My dad just drops it in the drawer. Done deal. Got the permit right on the spot. So the team was starting to build out a little bit. Basically, the Russian side of things, they were more like laborers. And there was a guy at the head of the laborers. His name was Vladimir, just a super, super guy. He and my father became fast friends. They were tight. They would work together all day. Afterwards, they'd go have a vodka together, and they would talk. Whatever broken Russian my dad had and whatever broken English Vladimir had, they would just make it happen, and they would just have a great time. He came into work one day and Vladimir wasn't there. The workers were all there, the laborers, and they're looking to Vladimir to kind of know what they have to do. Then he got the news that Vladimir had been murdered the night before.
Yeah.
Somebody had come into his apartment, shot him dead right in front of his teenage son.
Oh, no.
We didn't really ever find out what happened, but we think he probably borrowed money from the wrong people. That was a bad, bad period.
Or your dad.
It was a great friend of his that just got murdered by a mafia guy. You got to talk about the mafia, right? Because this was business in Russia. And this is why Vladimir was dead. Hudson Partners was very well protected. At the time, there were 3 mafias in Moscow. One of them was the Moscow Mafia. They were the biggest one. They were pretty much in control of the city. However, there was another mafia, the Chechen Mafia, which was also in Moscow, but they were also in other places as well. And there was one other mafia, but I can't remember who they were. But these were the 2 big ones. We were in the office one time, and there was this Georgian restaurant downstairs. Georgia, as in the country Georgia. Maybe 100 yards away from the office at the most. We're sitting in there one morning, and all of a sudden there's the sound of this automatic gunfire really close by, and everybody hits the floor. No bullets come flying in through the walls or anything like that. It turns out the Chechen Mafia was having a meeting in that Georgian restaurant that morning. Like, all of the big guys were there, and the Moscow Mafia had gotten word that this was happening and came in and they killed everybody. They killed all the wait staff. They killed the whole restaurant. Wow. Took them all out.
Despite the obvious concerns, and as Jeff alluded to earlier, if you wanted to do business in Russia, you needed to work with the mafia as well. When Jeff's dad had arrived for their first project at the Novosti building, he'd been told by his Russian counterparts that local labor would be supplied in Moscow. And it was. But the workers didn't necessarily have the experience and skills that were needed to do the work.
My dad, as he was bringing in new people who were skilled, decided he didn't need some of the people that were not skilled. And he started saying, we need to get rid of this guy. We need to get rid of this guy. And people would come to him and say, you can't do that. You can't just get rid of these people. These are guaranteed jobs. You can't just fire someone. Somebody else approached Hudson Partners about building a restaurant. It was an existing restaurant that everybody thought was pretty high class, but they wanted to make it world class. There was a guy named Victor who was in charge of that. He was running the old restaurant and he was going to run the new restaurant. Again, one day they show up and Victor's not there. They find out Victor had come off the elevator in his apartment building and somebody shot him. Just put a bullet right in his forehead.
Jeez.
My dad and one of the other guys went to his funeral. They had one of these old like Dracula coffins and he's in there, and they put a coin over the top of the bullet hole.
Oh.
They just covered the bullet hole with the coin. A couple days later, this guy and woman showed up and said, yeah, we're the new client.
Eventually, Jeff decided to pursue an opportunity and go into business with a few Russian acquaintances. Their idea was to import and sell U.S.-made garbage disposals. However, as business owners in Moscow, they not only had their own company, they also had their own mafia people.
As businesses started forming in Moscow and in other places, it became sort of like a street in Manhattan in 1930 or something, where all of these people have to pay protection money. I had a business there as well. We had our own mafia people we had to take care of.
Are you allowed to tell us what gang you were being represented by?
You mean was it the Moscow Mafia or the...
Yeah.
It was very likely the Moscow Mafia. I didn't ask too many questions, to be honest with you.
Were they worried about the Chechens coming after them at any given point?
Yeah, I don't think it was like that. There were flare-ups, but if I take Chicago, for instance, back in the old days when there were very distinct lines between the gangs, there was very little problems. Everybody sort of figured it out. There were flare-ups here and there, but they usually worked it out. Another mafia story. This one doesn't have a murder in it. I was in the office in Moscow and I was on the computer and I was doing some work. And there's this big guy that comes in the door, like huge, like this huge tank of a guy, with a shaved head. And just kind of hanging out, talking to some people, but he's kind of looking at me a lot and like hovering around. And I'm like, just kind of ignoring him, really. And my partners come up to me and they're like, hey, can you just like finish this up? And we'll go to dinner. Okay. So just go ahead and wrap this up and we'll go. And so I close everything up and I get up. And as soon as I get up, this guy sits down and opens up a video game and he starts playing a video game. I'm like,
on your computer?
Yeah, it was on the office computer. Jeff had to get off the computer to let the mafia guy play the video game.
Maybe he was trying to be a space invader.
There was this mafia guy, and I had met him before, and he was a younger guy, and one day he came in and he brought me this knife. And I was like, oh boy, what is this?
Thank you?
Yeah, exactly. I was like, okay, what are we going to do with this? Are you letting me choose my method of death or something? So then I was like, cool, I'm looking at the knife and it's really cool. I still have it and everything. And so then one of my guys comes up to me and goes, no, it's customary in Russia. If somebody hands you a knife, you have to give them a coin. These guys, they reached in their pocket, they gave me some coins, and I went over and I gave them some coins. And it was like, this is cool. A nice little custom we just did there, with the mafia guy.
After all he'd seen and been through, we asked Jeff about his perspective on the time he'd spent in Russia at that point in history.
It was all a great experience. The Russian people were fantastic in general. Not talking about the thieving business people, but just the normal people on the street. We made so many friends, but I would never do it again. Just because you don't have any control. You just lose all control. There's no way to win. Everybody I know that started a business there ended up getting taken by the Russian that was with them. And it's just the way that it always went.
Okay, that wraps up episode 3. Thank you so much for sticking with us. As usual, we'll post show-related pics to our Instagram account, which is YMIS Podcast. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. If you'd like to support the show, you can like, rate, review, share, and/or subscribe. And now you can also buy us a coffee. If you're interested in telling your most interesting story, follow the link to the form in our show description. You can also email us at ymisspodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, be interesting.
I'm not even going to give his name at all. I'm just going to call him the oil guy. One of the other guys, he said, yeah, just don't walk too close. You never know what's going to happen. You don't want to be too close. There might be even bodies in the concrete there. Who knows?
Multi-purpose.
Exactly. Yeah, as a tomb in a foreign press building.